Well, as you can see, the low levels are dry, but the mid levels are active. Lots of altocumulus here. We're going to look at this on the sounding, and I'll point out some features kind of tied into this. See if you can listen to this cow here. Kind of a pretty sunset here. Lots of colors in the sky. This is the sounding for Fort Worth this morning at 12Z. And focus on this part of the sounding here. This level here is about 20,000. 15,000 is about right here. And 25,000 is going to be here. So you notice this kind of looks like a mini sounding for what we see in the lower levels at other times of the year. So if you picture this being the ground, it's kind of dry. Then as you go a little bit higher, a few thousand feet higher, it's a little bit more humid. The dew point and temperature lines come close together. And then we have an inversion above that here. And then above that, we get into a little bit of unstable air. So normally when we see this, we start thinking of stratocumulus when we see that in the lower levels, because it rises and it gets trapped underneath. This inversion spreads out, and we tend to get broken cloud coverage. So this is happening in the upper levels, and we're seeing this manifested as altocumulus, pretty high altocumulus. And that's mostly a supercooled water cloud. The temperatures in that are about -11 to -12, which is about 12 Fahrenheit. But you can support supercooled drops all the way down to 20 and 30 degrees below 0 Celsius pretty easily. And that's one big reason we tend to get icing, clear icing at those levels, even though it's below freezing. So what's happening weather-wise across the U.S.? Looks stagnant. We've still got that low spinning across the Midwest there. Looks like now it's drifted up towards South Bend, maybe towards Chicago. And the center is about right there. And then further east we can see the development of maybe a lee side trough right along the Rockies from the Front Range all the way up to the Bighorn Mountains and all the way up to Edmonton and Calgary. Then we have this other low pressure system near Salt Lake City. So we'll check this out, and then we have one more that looks maybe like it might be frontal. So these are the dominant weather patterns, and we can see that the Gulf is pretty well shut down. Instead of having a flow right off the Gulf, like we normally get in early fall, we've got a very cool east-northeasterly flow. So this is what that upper level looks like, or that, what am I even saying? The stagnant low out in the Midwest. That's an old cutoff low, I guess you could call it, a decaying, occluded low. It's cut off from the main source of warm air, which is way out to the southeast. So it's kind of spinning around and gradually filling, and the pressures are rising within that. But we can see a very weak anticyclonic, or very weak counterclockwise flow around that low, which would be cyclonic. And that points to the center, maybe right there, just a little bit southeast of Chicago. But that's bringing down cool air from the north into the Great Plains. And just a quick look at what's going on out in Utah. This could be a frontal low. I see some pretty warm temperatures here from Salt Lake City and Ogden and southward. And then it looks maybe a tiny bit cooler on the high deserts north of Winnemucca and around Burns. So we're going to look for a possible front in this area on the synoptic scale charts. So let's check that out real quick. I don't have a chart prepared. Let me go get that. Let's see. We want to go to I don't even think I have a bookmark for that. The MAG group of NOAA, of INSEP, they've got a pretty good model page, and you can get some of these GFS plots. And their thickness charts are very easy to read. So this is the pattern we have for this evening. Well, not quite this evening. Let me run that up about 7 hours. And there we go. Let's look at the thermal structure real quick. We can see that barotropic low out over the Midwest, just showing a bunch of bullseye type thickness patterns, showing a cold core across Ohio and Indiana, and really no front in that area. Any front would be well to the south. And then going out west, yeah, we do have a front. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 thickness contours. So we're going to put that front about like here, from around Yellowstone Park all the way down to San Diego, and then maybe the warm front would be up in Alberta, kind of like that. So that's your analysis, and then there's a lee side trough right there out ahead of the front. And it looks like that front off the northwest coast, that's probably another cold core system. You can see it's cut off from the main gradient of thickness. So this is just a cold core system, and that should gradually diminish in intensity. But of course, what else is going on? We got Hurricane Matthew out there. There's what NHC has for their forecast. They've got it out at, let's see, yeah, 130 knots sustained, and then a central pressure of 940. Yeah, there you go, you can see that. Central pressure of 940 millibars. So this is starting to get towards, this is fairly deep for a hurricane. It's not, it's nothing like a Cat 5 storm. For that, we would want pressures down below 920, 910. But this is going to be one of the stronger ones of the season, most definitely. So we got Category 4 here. Let's take a closer look at that. I found a radar site here in Venezuela. We can see a little bit of that offshore. These are some of the outer spiral bands right here, and some stronger convection off this peninsula here, but the eye is well to the north. And then I did look at the polar orbiter data, and the eye is going to be about right here. Let's zoom in on that. Very distinct, very indistinct, I should say. It's covered by a lot of cirrus overcast, so not very well defined. But we can see that a little bit better on the infrared data. Let me shrink this window down so I can deal with it a little bit better. There we go. So this is some of the latest satellite data for Matthew. Now what's significant is tonight we're looking for a recurvature of the storm to the north. So what we're looking at on the hour-to-hour frames is a reflection of that curvature. So do we have that? Maybe a little bit right there on the first few frames, but then it kind of stops and becomes stationary. So we don't quite have that recurvature just yet. Here's the model forecasts. The big picture, you can see they've shifted to the east. So I think we're starting to pick up a little bit more of a trajectory moving this way. And that's bringing the forecast paths out over the Bahamas. So it's interesting. Initially, the storm did align pretty well with the American models, but towards the end, it seems like it falls in with the European models. And even the GFDL model has moved out to the east a bit. The GFS, though, and the GFS has had a very good track record, still sticking with a westerly course there. So Florida is not totally out of the woods yet. But this is good news overall. The likelihood of a landfall in Florida looks pretty slim. It is noteworthy the European models. You see two of them. Here's the ECMWF. Here's the UK model. They're bringing a north-northwest motion, which is a little bit of a change. But anyway, I'm not really familiar with the physics in these models too well, so I'm going to leave my commentary there. And let's see here. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to show you, you can see how close we are to the recurvature phase of the storm here. So we're looking for that to happen tonight. If that does not happen tonight, that will almost definitely shift the tracks west. So the next 12 to 24 hours is going to be a critical time right now. So let's go to our forecast here. Let's go to the GFS. Get my window centered here. Okay, so starting out for tonight, you know all the patterns because we did our surface analysis. So we've got that front out in the western U.S. and a barotropic low in the Midwest, and probably the remains of an old front just off the east coast. And here comes Matthew way down here. And the moisture is still pretty far to the south. So over the weekend and into the first of next week, we have continued ridging into the Midwest and eastern U.S. Now the barotropic low is superimposed on this pattern. It's somewhere in here. But the large-scale, synoptic scale pattern has a very large anticyclone over the eastern U.S. So that will continue to drive some cooler air southward and keep things kind of mild. Then going through next week, we start opening up the Gulf, and you can see some moisture starts moving northward along the I-35 corridor. And here comes Matthew, going with that slightly westward motion across the Bahamas for midweek. And then the GFS towards next weekend, bringing landfall, well, maybe not a landfall, but skimming the coast right here around Wilmington and the North Carolina Outer Banks. And then let's see, for the following week, October 10th, still going with that idea of the remnants of the storm making landfall around Maine and around New Hampshire. And still pretty deep at that phase, about 965 millibars. Continued ridging in the central U.S., keeping it kind of cool. Now there is a little bit of a front moving through here. See this right here? This is around Friday the 7th. So we do have one frontal passage in between. May get a squall line with that Friday into Saturday. And then after that, that's when we get the high building southward. And after that, looks pretty stagnant across the U.S. Looks like a couple of very strong lows making their way across the western Canadian provinces. And let's see here. Yeah, I think that's about all I've got here. So I appreciate you watching, and I'll be here at the same time tomorrow, 8 o'clock, and we'll see you then. Good night.